Here's the thing about millionaires that nobody wants to tell you. They're not special, and that should make you feel way better than it probably does right now. Because if they're not special, that means the only thing standing between you and building serious wealth is probably just information. Information you don't have yet. Information that honestly, most people are never going to get because they're too busy arguing on Twitter about whether $1 million even counts as rich anymore. My name is Tom, and I spend way too much time thinking about why some people build wealth and others don't, even when they make the exact same income. If you're someone who makes decent money but somehow still feels broke at the end of every month, or you're in your 30s wondering why your net worth looks more like a Twitter follower count than actual wealth, hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up because what I'm about to show you is probably going to make you slightly uncomfortable. So I spent the last 6 months going through financial data, interviews, and wealth studies covering over 1,000 people who became millionaires before they turned 40. And look, I know what you're thinking. Oh great, another video about waking up at 4 a.m. and eating nothing but chicken and rice. That's not this. What I found was way more interesting and honestly way more frustrating because these three things are so simple that it actually makes you angry that more people don't talk about them. Let me start with what I didn't find. I didn't find a bunch of trust fund kids. I didn't find people who got lucky with crypto in 2017. I didn't find a secret formula or a magic income number. What I found were regular people, a lot of them making between $70,000 and $150,000 a year, who did three specific things that everyone else somehow skips. And the crazy part? Most of them didn't even realize they were doing these things. They just stumbled into the right pattern and stuck with it. Here's what most people don't realize about building $1 million. It's not about making $1 million. Nobody makes $1 million. You know what $1 million in annual income is? That's top half of 1% territory. That's not you. That's probably not me. That's not most of the millionaires in this country. The millionaires I studied had a median income of around $98,000. Some made less, some made more. But here's what they all did. They built their million. They accumulated it. And the difference between those two things, making versus building, that's the entire game. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Tom, groundbreaking stuff. Save money and invest it. Where's my Nobel Prize? But hold on, because this is where it gets interesting. The first thing every single one of these millionaires did wasn't about money at all. It was about time. Specifically, it was about understanding that wealth isn't built in years, it's built in decades. And they made that mental shift before they turned 30. Let me explain what I mean. When you're 25, 30 years feels like 3 lifetimes. You can't even imagine what you're going to want for lunch next Tuesday, let alone where you're going to be in 2055. But here's the thing about compound interest that nobody really explains properly. It's not magic. It's just math that requires time, like a lot of time, uncomfortable amounts of time. And the millionaires I studied all had this moment, usually in their mid to late 20s, where they stopped optimizing for their 30s and started optimizing for their 60s. I know that sounds insane. You're supposed to enjoy your 20s, right? Travel, go out, live your life. And look, I'm not saying become a monk and live off ramen. What I'm saying is there's this psychological switch that happens when you realize that the you in your 60s is going to be the same person as the you right now. It's not some different person. It's you. And that version of you is either going to be financially free or financially desperate. And the decision about which one it's going to be is happening right now, today, at whatever age you're watching this. So thing number one, they adopted a 30-year vision before they hit 30 years old. And this changed everything about how they made decisions. When you're thinking in 30-year blocks, spending $1,200 a month on a car payment feels different. Not wrong necessarily, but different, because you start doing the math. $1,200 a month is $14,400 a year. Over 30 years, if you just invested that at an average market return of around 10%, you're looking at over $2.7 million. Now look, I'm not saying don't buy a car. I'm saying the millionaires I studied bought the $10,000 used Honda, not the $40,000 new BMW, because they realized that the difference between those two purchases invested over time was literally the difference between retiring at 65 and retiring at 55. Same person, same life, 10-year difference in freedom, all because of one car decision in your 20s. But here's what makes this even more powerful. Once you make that mental shift to thinking in decades, you stop sweating the small stuff. Everyone's out here stressing about whether they should buy the $4 latte, and meanwhile, they're hemorrhaging $2,000 a month on a car payment, a massive apartment they barely use, and subscriptions they forgot they had. The millionaires I studied weren't the ones skipping coffee. They were the ones who looked at their 3 or 4 biggest expenses and realized that cutting just one of those in half would change their entire financial trajectory. This brings me to thing number 2, and this one's going to hurt a little bit. Every single millionaire I studied lived below their means during their highest earning years. Not at the beginning of their career when they had no choice, but during their peak earning years, their 30s and early 40s when they could have afforded to inflate their lifestyle, and they just didn't. Here's what most people don't realize. Your 30s are a trap. You're finally making real money. Maybe you got a promotion. Maybe you switched jobs and got a huge bump. Maybe your career just naturally progressed and suddenly you're making 6 figures. And what does everyone around you do? They upgrade everything. Bigger house, new car, nicer vacations, better restaurants, and it all makes sense in the moment because you can afford it, right? The math works. You make $120,000, so a $3,000 apartment is fine, because that's only 30% of your gross income. Except here's what the millionaires figured out. Affordable and optimal are not the same. Just because you can afford it doesn't mean buying it is the right financial decision. And they know this sounds obvious, but watch what happens to most people. They get a $20,000 raise. Guess what their savings rate does? It stays exactly the same. Or worse, it goes down, because now they've justified a lifestyle inflation that eats the entire raise plus a little bit more. The millionaires I studied did something different. When they got a raise, they saved it. Not all of it, but most of it. I'm talking like 60 to 70% of every raise went straight into investments. And before you say, well, that's easy for them, let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah is a teacher. She makes $62,000 a year. She became a millionaire at 39. You want to know how? She lived like she made $40,000 a year for 15 years straight and invested the difference. That's it. No side hustle that made 6 figures, no inheritance, no crypto moonshot, just a teacher's salary and the discipline to not inflate her lifestyle every time she got a tiny cost of living raise. Now you might be thinking, okay, Tom, so I'm supposed to just live like I'm broke forever. What's the point of making money? And this is where everyone gets it wrong. Living below your means doesn't mean living like you're poor. It means being intentional about where your money goes. The millionaires I studied spent money on things they valued. They went on vacations. They went out to eat. They bought nice things. But they didn't spend money on everything. They picked 2 or 3 categories that mattered to them and went cheap on everything else. I talked to a guy named Marcus who became a millionaire at 37. This dude spent $15,000 a year on travel. He went everywhere. Thailand, Japan, Peru, all over Europe. But you know what he drove? A 2008 Toyota Corolla with 190,000 miles on it. He lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment that cost $900 a month in a low cost of living city. He didn't care about cars. He didn't care about having a fancy place. He cared about experiences and freedom, so he optimized for that and cut everything else to the bone. That's the real secret. It's not about deprivation. It's about knowing what you actually care about and being ruthless about cutting the things you don't. Most people spend money on everything and wonder why they can't afford the things they actually want. The millionaires spent money on almost nothing so they could go all in on the few things that mattered. Which brings me to thing number 3, and this is the one that actually builds the wealth. Every single millionaire I studied invested aggressively in assets that appreciated. And I know that sounds like the most boring, obvious advice ever, but you have to understand what this actually means in practice because this is where most people screw it up. When I say invested aggressively, I don't mean they were day trading stocks or buying NFTs or whatever the hype investment of the moment was. I mean they were putting 20, 30, sometimes 40% of their gross income into boring index funds, retirement accounts, and real estate every single month for decades, without stopping, even when the market crashed, especially when the market crashed. Here's what most people don't realize about wealth building. It's not about finding the perfect investment. It's about time in the market, not timing the market. I know you've heard that before, but let me show you why this matters. If you invest $500 a month starting at 25 and you get an average return of 10%, by the time you're 65, you'll have about $3.1 million. If you wait until you're 35 to start, same $500, same return, you'll have about 900,000. You waited 10 years and it cost you $2.2 million. That's not because the investment was better or worse, it's because compound interest needs time, like a lot of time, uncomfortable amounts of time. And the millionaires I study